What's up, NBA fan? What's up, all sports fans? This your boy JB, host of the Behind the Bench Podcast Networking channel. Giving a shout out to the rest of the crew: Shad, Kelvin, Jermaine, KB Film Room, and Big Dog Talk Sports. That's right. Everyone who's tuning in today, thank you for supporting Behind the Bench. Subscribe to the channel. Help make this show the best that it can be. This is a hot button topic. As I like to say, Mayday, Mayday. And this is where narratives, this is where agendas, this is where spin cycles have harpooned and damaged NBA commentary, especially when it pertains to figures who have been given major platforms on commercial media to discuss the landscape of the NBA, as well as the history of the NBA. And many voices out there are revisiting the past, distorting the past, misrepresenting the past, in an attempt to rewrite history to make a certain individual look good, or to rationalize decisions that he has made. And here's the latest example of that. And what's unfortunate about all of this is that you hate to continue to point the obvious, why this is being done, who this is being done for, at the expense of the overall environment throughout the NBA. It's creating a great deal of cynicism, and it's created a great deal of division between the era of today versus the era of yesterday. And all I can say is, growing up watching the NBA for 5 decades now, this was not prominent during the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, the 2000s. It started around late 2010s. And it's permeated throughout, year after year after year, from about, I'm going to say, 2016 till the present day. And I want to talk about something that one Richard Jefferson said in response to what one Charles Barkley said about this super team era. And I keep saying this super team era, man, it literally took the axis of the NBA and turned it upside down, where it started to operate in a very unpredictable way, but predictably would lead to more problems than we was led to believe or even imagine when all this started. So knowing that it's been a problem, this is why they have to try to retort what's being said and try to point the quote unquote blame to basketball of yesteryear. So Charles Barkley did an interview with Bill Simmons, I guess on Bill Simmons' podcast. He's a lifelong NBA figure, and he's a fan of the Boston Celtics growing up in the 1980s, right? So Bill Simmons brought up the challenges that this new CBA is posing on teams throughout the league, where they can't afford to maintain their roster if they've exceeded the salary cap or the luxury tax to put those teams together. Now, me personally, I think the CBA is the best thing that's happened to this league probably 10 years. No, I'm going to say 15 years. But what it's done, it has over-penalized teams that not participate in this super team approach or was driven by player empowerment impulse, those teams are being overpenalized, or so we may think. But I believe this new CBA is fleshing out all this nefarious activity, and a lot of people don't like it because now we're gonna have to, they're gonna have to really build teams, and we're going to go out there and compete. And a lot of people don't like that. So in response to Charles Barkley, basically Charles Barkley said, let's put an end to this nonsense because certain players penchant for stacking the deck and forming super teams led to that new CBA. That's what did it. If the super team era had never been allowed to take place to begin with, this new CBA wouldn't even be, it would have never been drawn up. You see what I'm saying? And to tell you the truth, one of the primary reasons why the lockout occurred during the at the start of the 2011-2012 season was in direct correlation to what had took place during the summer of 2010. Oh yes, when we saw three superstars taking pay cuts, right, to join forces manipulating the salary cap. Well, what came out of that was owners had to come up with an incentive to get their star players to stay with their original team without them jetting on out of there and dipping on them. So they came up with the idea of the Supermax contract. And the first player who would have been given the Supermax would have been Anthony Davis. And he's playing with the New Orleans Pelicans. But of course, we know what happened. He turned it down, requested a trade, and forced his way on to the Lakers for the benefit of you-know-who. And then, basically Charles Barkley mentioned the Hurricane and Kevin Durant. But see, the thing about it is, Kevin Durant, as he stated after he won his first championship of his career with Golden State, he said, I followed the path and the example set by the Hurricane 6 years prior in the summer 2010. But many of the talking heads got upset at KD when KD was a beloved figure at one time. He was considered an ambassador to the league, right? During that time. When he was in OKC, played at the Rucker tournament. I think that was in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. At the Rucker tournament, dropped to 60 points, which was a Rucker tournament record by an NBA player, right? And they got upset by Kevin Durant because he beat the Hurricane at his own game. But now, because the super team era is being eliminated step by step, they want to tag the push for the super team era as if KD ushered it in, which he did not. Okay, so basically what Charles Barkley said was he called them out saying, they don't want to compete. And in turn, Richard Jefferson was a solid player, man. He was a solid player when he was with the New Jersey Nets playing with Jason Kidd and Vince Carter. He was solid. I think even one year, he averaged 20 points a game. He was a solid player. He comes out here in defense of the Hurricane because he was a teammate of his when he was, when the Hurricane returned back to Cleveland, from 2014 to 2018. Richard Jefferson, or better known as RJ, was one of his teammates during that time. And see, this is what I don't like. A lot of talking heads want to go back in the past and use it as a rationalization for what's going on today. You see, so the past gets thrown under the bus when the way superstars approached the game back then was polar opposite to what we see many of the superstars of the past decade has carried out their career. See, when we say superstar, think about it. Superstar stands above everybody else in terms of ability, talent, expectation. It's the difference between a superstar and an all-star. It's different between an all-star and a high-level role player. It's different between a high-level role player and a role player. And then you got your reserves. The superstar sets the tone. That's why they call them superstars. When they start joining forces and forming super squads, well, the mentality got compromised. You see what I'm saying? So that's why I say the mentality of many of the superstars who ventured in that path couldn't, I don't think they can stand up to a superstar yesterday who had that full mentality of, hey, I'm the driving engine of this team. Wherever it goes, I'm going to lead it. The mentality is totally different. So I want to share what Rich Jefferson said in response to Charles Barkley. I'm going to share this real quick. This was his response. I remember Charles Barkley going to Houston, and then he teamed up with Akeem Olajuwon, and then Scottie Pippen was also there. Olajuwon and Barkley were in year 14. Pippen was in year 11, so he was in his prime. That sounds like teaming up. If I'm wrong. Hey, let's go to Shaq and Kobe. Does anybody remember when they recruited Gary Payton when he was still in his prime, and then they recruited Karl Malone? Do we remember that? The second all-time leading scorer to play power forward next to Shaq in his prime, after they had won 3 of the last 4 championships. So are we saying Shaq and Kobe? So when we looking at teaming up, he did it. He joined Olajuwon, and then Scottie Pippen came in. Did we forget our history, his own history? See, this is an example of how history becomes convoluted when you have a person like RJ who has a platform in the NBA. You know, he was co-host, if I'm not mistaken, of this year's NBA Finals between Oklahoma City and the Indiana Pacers. So he has a profile, right? And like I said, he was a solid player. But the problem is he's distorting things, man. To rationalize what the hurricane ushered in during the summer 2010. I'm going to break down each one of these scenarios. Hold on one second. First of all, Charles Barkley did not team up in Houston. Charles Barkley had played 4 years in Phoenix after playing 7 to 8 years with his original team, the Philadelphia 76ers, who he was drafted by, and he got the opportunity to play with Moses Malone and Dr. J, players of that ilk. But even then, Dr. J was starting to age, he was slowing down, and Moses Malone, bit by bit, he was starting to move beyond his prime. He was like on the back end or tail end of his prime. Okay. So Barkley played 4 years in Phoenix, and by that 4th year, they was barely a 500 team. So they was looking to kind of start over again, and they traded Charles Barkley to Phoenix after the 95-96 season. And Robert Horry was included in that trade, who was drafted by the Houston Rockets. I think, like Sam Cassell, I believe, was also involved in that trade. Barkley was traded to the Houston Rockets, and by that point, Hakeem Olajuwon had aged. That wasn't the same Hakeem Olajuwon, man, who was causing havoc in 1994 and 1995 when he led Houston to back-to-back championships. You see, and Clyde Drexler was still on the team that year, and they did reach the Western Conference Finals and lost to the Utah Jazz in 6 games when John Stockton hit that game-winning shot against them, where Utah advanced to the finals for the first time in franchise history. Then Clyde Drexler retired, and then after the Bulls won a 6th championship in 98, they did a sign and trade because Pippen wanted the contract that he felt he had deserved for years, right? And I'm not even saying he didn't deserve it, but nonetheless, they did a sign and trade. He was traded to the Houston Rockets. Now, don't get me wrong, Barkley was excited about Pippen being traded to Houston, but Barkley was past his prime. Hakeem Olajuwon was past his prime. He was not. Neither player was in their prime. Pippen, at that point, was 33 years old, and he was aging just like all great players do when they start, reaching a kind of like their early 30s to about that mid 30 range. Okay, so Pippen gets traded to Houston Rockets, right? Now, based on a revisionist perspective, that was considered a super team. But in real time, that was not considered a super team. You know what that was considered? 3 veterans past their prime who was brought together by management trying to give themselves an opportunity to compete for a championship. And to show you how much they aged, that team lost in the first round to the Los Angeles Lakers, which featured a third year player Kobe Bean Bryant. They lost in the first round. So it wasn't like they was dominating anything like that. And then Pippen left Houston after 1 year and signed with the Portland Trail Blazers. Okay, so we're going to squelch that right there. Then he brings up Kobe and Shaq. The Kobe and Shaq team that won 3 straight championships. They didn't join forces. Kobe Bryant was 18. Well, actually, technically, he was 17 years old when he was drafted. And then he turned 18 prior to the start of his rookie year. He was 17. And he was drafted before they signed Shaquille O'Neal as a free agent. So Kobe was this prodigious high school talent brought into the league as a rookie. They wasn't a prime. Heck, even Shaquille O'Neal wasn't technically in his full prime. Shaquille O'Neal had only been in the league 4 years when he signed with the Lakers. And I keep saying about them too, they went through the fire for 4 years before, as teammates, before they won their first championship together. They went through the fire. I sat there and watched it. They nemesis were the Utah Jazz and the San Antonio Spurs. Nothing was given to them too. Okay, so they didn't join forces. That was not a super team. Because if you look at if you look at that team, the Lake Show, you had Shaquille O'Neal was an MVP, the most dominant player in the league in 2000. And then after the 2000 championship run, Kobe just took off after that point, became the best player in the NBA, which was confirmed by Shaq during the Western Conference Finals versus San Antonio Spurs in 2001. But you had 2 star players, superstars, who didn't join forces, who was developed and built by management, and you had tremendous role players. Robert Ory, Ray Foxes, Derek Fishers, people like that. Okay. So when they brought in, after they won their 3rd straight championship, they lost to the Spurs in the conference semifinals in 2003, right? So at that point, their run was over, right? So they was looking to improve at the power forward position because Robert Ory had left the Lakers to sign with the Spurs. So they needed a power forward. They didn't have no power forwards on the team. Okay, check this out. When they brought in Karl Malone and Gary Payton was like 35, 36 years old. He was well past his prime. He was no longer known as the Glove like he was during the Seattle Supersonic years. Karl Malone had just played 18, 19 years in the NBA. And Utah, now Karl Malone was looking to try to, compete for a championship. The run with Utah was over. And Utah was looking to get younger anyway. And then eventually they would draft Darren Williams to replace John Stockton, right? And then they brought over Carlos Boozer as a free agent from the Cleveland Cavaliers. So Darren Williams was the new John Stockton. Carlos Boozer was brought in to, kind of be the new Karl Malone for that team. Okay. Gary Payton was brought to the Lakers only because one of the primary reasons was because they didn't know if Kobe Bryant was going to be available for the next season because of his, issues off the court, his legal issues off the court. So it wasn't like they was recruiting Karl Malone and Gary Payton. They needed a power forward. And at that time, during free agency, you didn't see the plethora of free agents available or the constant turnover of players during free agency that we see today. Although it's beginning to curtail, you don't see as many superstars right now available in free agency, which is a good thing. So everything is slowly returning back to form, But nonetheless, Karl Malone played 1 year for the Lakers and retired. Gary Payton, after playing that 1 year for the Lakers, he went on to the Miami Heat. Okay. And I'm just, just responding to what he said. So one Richard Jefferson, they don't put things in proper perspective because, see, it's hard to do that when you're trying to revise history 20, 30, 40 years after the fact. This is 2025, and they trying to, highlight what happened in 1997, almost some 30 years after the fact. So things are going to get convoluted. So it's easy to throw out this notion that, man, Charles Barkley, man, he recruited and teamed up with Scottie Pippen and Hakeem Olajuwon when Charles Barkley was traded to the Houston Rockets. Because they had players on Houston that were good, young, quality players who had just, they were experienced championship players, Robert Horry, Sam Cassell, or whatnot, to bring in a Charles Barkley. But they was past their prime. Olajuwon's past his prime. Clyde Drexler had retired, and Pippen was past his prime. And then, I think even he mentioned the Boston Celtics of 2000, when they brought in KG and Ray Allen. KG was 13 years in, past his prime. Ray Allen was 11 years in. He was on the other side of 30. And Ray Allen was, when they acquired him from Seattle Sonics, he was seen more as a marquee player than a franchise player. KG was past his prime. That was not the same KG that won league MVP in 2004 when he led the T-Wolves, Minnesota Timberwolves, to the conference finals. And in that Boston Celtics team that won the championship in 2008, heck, even Paul Pierce was 30 years old at that point. And all three players were playing on bad teams before their trades went down. Nobody on that Boston Celtics team in 2008 averaged 20 points a game or more. Nobody. Even Paul Pierce. It was, it was like 19 points a game. Ray Allen dropped about 18 a game. That was not a super team, man. Mainly what really established their success that year was their defense. And then they struggled all postseason. They lost 10 postseason games before they won the championship. So that was not a super team. They did not really dominate throughout the course of the postseason. They almost lost in the first round to the 39-43 Atlanta Hawks. They don't put things in perspective. They just throw stuff out there to rationalize what the Hurricanes been doing since summer 2010. And what Charles Barkley is saying that most basketball fans allude to is that the Miami Heat, when LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh joined forces, and I'm going to close this up, they did so while all three players, Dwayne Wade was 28. He was in his absolute prime, coming off a scoring title in 2009. You had a situation where you had a player in his absolute prime, a superstar franchise player in his absolute prime, another superstar, two other superstar franchise players beginning to enter their absolute prime. 2 top 5 players. I believe, Dwayne Wade was considered a top 3 player. And the fact that the Hurricane left his own team to join forces in Miami, well, it's easy to conclude that at that point, Dwayne Wade was considered a better player. But nonetheless, 2 top 5 players, right? And a top 10 talent joining forces in a prime. You will not see another example of that happening in any decade of the NBA that preceded the summer of 2010. They could bring up Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, and Will Chamberlain. Will Chamberlain was traded to the Lakers, and by the time he was traded to the Lakers, that man's past his prime. He was still dominant per se, but he wasn't dropping 40 points and 50 points a game like he was in the beginning stage of his career. Jerry West and Elgin Baylor was on the tail end of they was on the back end of their prime. And heck, they darn near all retired together. Baylor retired the season they won, the 72 Lakers season. He retired like the first week or two into that season. And they went on to win 69 games. And then Chamberlain and West, I believe, retired the same year, 1974. They don't want to acknowledge. They can bring up any team. They can bring up Showtime Lakers. They can bring up the 80 Celtics, the Bad Boy Pistons, the Chicago Bulls. They can bring up any team of the past, the 70s Knicks. Those teams, even Golden State before they brought KD, those teams were built from scratch balls. They could bring up any example. And a super team, the way they brought their team together in summer 2010, and they extracted 2 superstars from their own team in the same conference. So you eliminating the degree of difficulty in the conference to ensure that you go to multiple finals, consecutive finals. That's why the Hurricane said not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7. You created the least degree of difficulty. No other team in the past that was long-standing, they didn't operate in that fashion. That's how you know they weren't super teams. And like I said, when Barkley went to Houston, he was past his prime, and he was traded there. And Phoenix wanted to trade him because they got older and they was no longer even, they was barely a playoff team. You see what I'm saying? But I just want to drop that in response to what RJ was trying to drop right there. But one Richard Jefferson. That's why I say, man, I'm just happy that we have content providers such as Behind the Bench here, the crew, and other content providers, man, who feel it's almost like it's our job to really lay down the blueprint of the real history and how things actually happen. Because once you do that, then you can identify when all this madness started. It started in the summer of 2010, better known as the decision, when the Hurricane said out of his own mouth, these were his own words, I'm going to Miami to join forces. So when you say forces, you're referring to superstars in a prime. So I just want to drop that golden nugget. Like I said, man, this era is over. That's why they're trying to rewrite history. Because quiet as it's kept, when he was brought to the Lakers, my squad, the intended purpose was to flip all that young talent around, to stack the deck to create a super team where he can try to tie one Michael Jordan in championships. And that attempt and experiment, it fell way short of expectations. And all they got out of that was a bubble chip. So I just want to drop that gold nugget. Please leave your comments and thoughts. Until next time, JB, this is BTB. behind the bench.